Good evening, everyone. Thank you so very much for joining us. We're so glad you are here and we welcome you. I hope you were able to join us for the first session this morning, and I hope that you will make plans to attend the remaining two sessions that will be offered on tomorrow. The sign-in information is the same as you used for this panel tonight. The panels tomorrow are Making Magazine, questions businesses might have, and that's at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. And then we'll have a multi-faith panel at 1 p.m. I hope that you all can join us for both. If this is your first time using Hopin, let me give you a quick Hopin orientation to this new format. On the left side of your screen, you'll find resources in the Expo section. On the stage, you will find the PSA that Tabitha Walker of Big Hair Production. If you haven't seen it, please take a moment to watch it. On the right side of your screen, there are tabs for event and session. We are all in the session, so use that set of tabs, please. At the end of each panel, as time allows, we will try to answer questions from the audience. So use the Q&A section under the Sessions tab to submit any questions you might have. So many may ask, why are we doing this? In the wake of the recent effort to enact a Comprehensive Civil Rights Ordinance for Macon-Bibb County, many in our community on both sides of the discussion cited the need for education regarding why a local ordinance is necessary and what effects it would be on the community. Additionally, many questions arose about recent court rulings and how discrimination laws are currently written and interpreted. Business owners asked what local non-discrimination protections would mean for small businesses. Finally, in some cases, erroneous and fear-inciting information was spread in the community and the focus taken away from the large number of people these types of laws are meant to protect, such as people of color, residents whose country of origin was outside of the U.S., our military veterans, women, and those who are differently able. In an effort to address these concerns and provide a forum for discussion, we will use these sessions to explore all facets of a local non-discrimination ordinance. This event was made possible through an on-the-table mini grant from the Community Foundation of Central Georgia and the Knight Foundation, along with sponsorships from Georgia Equality, Charles E. Cox Jr., Attorney at Law, Travis Jean Emporium, Dozier Law Firm, and Georgia Women and Those Who Stand With Us. This panel is hosted by the Georgia NAACP. The moderator for tonight's session is Weston Stroud. We're happy to have him. He's a graduate of the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry. He studied environmental policy, planning, and urban design. He is the local transit planner for Macon-Bibb County Transit Authority and serves as the policy committee chair for the local Macon-Bibb County Democratic Party. Weston also serves as a board member for Bike Walk Macon, the Douglas Theater, the Macon Area Habitat for Humanity, and the Middle Georgia Joint Development Authority. And so now I'm happy to turn it over to Weston.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for that intro. But I really just want to kind of take this moment to give it to the panelists and to introduce each panelist. I'll kind of go through a little bit of each panelist's background, and then I'll provide opportunity for each of them to speak. And then we'll kind of go into some of the questions and to some of the discussion. So first with us, we have Dr. James Beverly. He's the minority leader for the Georgia House of Representatives. And if you guys know Stacey Abrams, she used to hold that position. It's a very powerful position. Dr. Beverly has represented Georgia's 143rd district in Macon since 2011. and the legislator. He serves on numerous committees, from the Rules and Appropriations, Transportation in specific, Ethics, Health and Human Services, Retirement, Special Rules, and Small Business Development. He's also a member of the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus. Leader Beverly earned an undergraduate degree from Guilford College, a doctorate in optometry from Pennsylvania College of Optometry, and an MBA. He's from, I want to say, oh, let's see. He's also an optometrist, small business owner, former chairman of the Macon Bibb Community Enhancement Authority, and past lecturer in leadership at Mercer University, Wesleyan College. He has an MPA from Harvard Kennedy School. Also with us, we have Ms. Tedra Clemens Houston. Tedra is native of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, made her way to Macon by way of Mercer University, where she earned her bachelor's degree in criminal justice and her JD from Mercer Law School in 2009. She has worked in various areas of criminal justice reform and community enhancement, including researching criminal recidivism and mental illness with the law firm of King and Spalding in Atlanta, Georgia. As part of the habeas project with Mercer Law School, Tedra assisted in appeals for inmates serving life sentences. Currently, Ms. Houston serves as executive director of the Macon-Bibb County Community Enhancement Authority, where she oversees the management of the Little Richer House, coordinates affordable housing initiatives, has created local workforce development programs, and continually works on projects and initiatives to eliminate blight and poverty in Macon-Bibb County. And Reverend James Woodall. Reverend James Woodall is a native of Riverdale, Georgia, and an alumnus of Georgia Southern University. He graduated with a Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science with a minor in Religious Studies. He is an 8-year veteran in the U.S. Army Reserve and has served as an intelligence analyst. He is in his first year of Masters of Divinity program at the Morehouse School of Religion and Interdenominational Theological Center. As a Silver Life member of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, he has served in numerous positions, advancing to being the state's president in 2019. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for offering your time. I'll now allow each of you all to speak, and then we'll get into some of the questions. And we'll start, I guess, with Dr. Beverly, and then we'll go Tedra, and then Reverend Will.
Thank you, Austin, and great to see you, Tedra and James. Good to see you guys. Deeply grateful to speak to y'all tonight about some issues that hopefully resolution to. It appears we'll see how this works. Anyway, to the conversation, looking forward to the question. Talk a little bit about what's going on in crimes. In addition, the citizens are here and
Awesome, thank you. Tedra?
It's great seeing everyone this evening. It's just a pleasure and honor to be on this panel tonight. I have great interest in the Comprehensive Civil Rights, the legislation behind it, and also dispelling all the rumors and fear-mongering that happened when we tried to bring it about the first time, and just hoping that this 2-day seminar can really just enlighten us, understanding why this is so important to everyone. And so just really excited to go through the questions and not only but learn more tonight as well.
Reverend Woodall?
Yes, peace and power, beautiful Black people, or all people really. It's great to be. Can you all hear me? No.
Let's see. see. Give him a little time to come back. I'm gonna start kind of looking at some of the questions, and we'll give Rep a second to get everything back. But before we get into the questions, I want to provide proper context. Since we are talking about Macon-Bibb County, I want to start with a local hero whose story kind of coincides with where I believe this discussion is going to go. There we go. Back.
Can you all hear me? Can you all hear me now?
It's kind of spotty. I think it's the reception of the headphones to audio. It's a little different. We'll get back to it. So the person who I wanted to cover is John Oliver Killins. Can you see anything any better? Let's see. We'll get with it. And Ariane, maybe he can direct message you and see if we can figure it out. But John Oliver Killins, he was actually a three-time nominated Pulitzer Prize or nominee. He was a writer and Black intellect from Macon-Bibb County, and he actually passed away in 1987. But a lot of his stories and writings were based off of the conversations that he had with his grandmother, his great grandmother, because she was able to tell him a little bit about slavery and provide context to traditional Black mythology and folklore, and so that inspired a lot of his writings. He served in World War II from 1942 to 1945, and he moved up to New York, and he started the Harlem's Writers Guild, which is the oldest Writers Guild for African Americans in the nation. And this guy is from Macon, Georgia. And in that process, while he was up there in New York, he actually urged Maya Angelou to come up to New York and to start focusing on her writing. And so he was influential in her career and even getting her to really look at writing as her way out. And during that time in New York, he was also able to meet up with a young minister who was up and coming by the name of Malcolm X. And through this interaction, some of the writers in the Harlem Writers Guild helped write the charter for Malcolm X organization called the Organization of Afro-American Unity, which didn't focus on civil rights, but it focused on human rights, not rights that are predicated on your citizenship to a nation or a state, but simply for being. There are citizens of all background in our state and local municipality whose civil rights are not protected here. If there was a green book for LGBTQ plus community, or ableism, or ageism, or all the other disenfranchised groups, would Macon be a destination in that green book, or would it be a sundown town? What spaces and people are we not protecting? Are we not accommodating? And what does comprehensive civil rights look like? And what's included, who's excluded now that it's being brought to the forefront? And who are we knowingly excluding from these opportunities now that we're now aware of the people who haven't been considered? And so these are some of the questions, things that I would like for us to kind of get into. And so off that, I kind of want to ask, what rights are protected by the state of Georgia and which ones are overlooked in your experience? I'm gonna start with Dr. Beverly, because his scope is broad and he could kind of speak towards, just some of the things that are happening at the state level and some of the protections that are there and some of the ones that are missing. Doctor.
Can you all hear me now?
Oh yeah. There we go.
Glad for a minute there, bro. Let me get into that did substantively in June of 2020 when we passed the hate bill, which gave chance to add time sentence or conviction. The bill was based on gender, and the reality could have gone further. Basis for a discussion, which I think is why do we have law with the 14th Amendment, which gives people the law. We don't have that correspond. And where that becomes a problem is in a space where Floyd is certainly the pandemic, people have lost through no fault. Figure out how to make it meet. And the last thing you want roadblock your race, your gender, or your sexual orientation. And the only redress you have, because we don't have basic 14 rights. So instead of to remedy part of that, you to go to federal court, work, right? And is a big problem in the state of Georgia is that we have to have law that corresponds to the amendment. Free effort, some of it happens on a state level would be the overarching that I sort of keep in 14th Amendment.
Absolutely. And I think Tedra may mention to this earlier that I don't want to forget or be remiss to acknowledging this, that in the first time that we had this discussion about comprehensive civil rights, a lot of it was focused on sexual identity and these things that at times are very political and are tough conversations to have. But I just want to provide context to kind of what we're looking at. So like James was saying, we don't have a lot of protections in our current policies. So, but some of the things that we do have, right, is Georgia Age Discrimination Act. Now, that's only for people that are 40 to 70 years old. So what does that mean for the youth? How do we determine when they're not getting those opportunities because their age may be a factor, right? Who are we looking at? And that's regardless of the size of the institution. So that's talking about age. But then when we get to employment, it's predicated on how many people are employed. So if you have 15 or more, then you got to look at certain things like the Equal Employment for Persons with Disability Code. But if you're less than 15 people, there's no policy on it. And if it's not on paper, it's in flux. So why is it important? I'm gonna start with Tedra, then I want to get to you, James. Why is it important for people of color to understand our stake in this conversation and to expand this conversation past the things that separate us? And James, when we get to you, I mean, you coming from the religious clergy background, like that's something that I would really like for us to dive into. But Tedra, could you kind of kick us off with it?
Yeah, I think sometimes we don't realize how ingrained or how affected we are by things. I believe that it was able to be shrouded in other with other things to make us fearful. But For instance, right now, as a Black person in Macon, if I'm fired and I feel like I was fired unjustly as a Black person, I have to go through federal court to get any kind of recompense. And I know that as someone with a legal background. Everyone doesn't even know that. Secondly, it costs a fortune to go and get representation to defend you federally. And that's not even looking at just the money I have to pay as a citizen. Even that business is going to pay a fortune to defend themselves federally. And so when we're looking at acts such as these, and and people will say we'll try to just pull out one thing to make us not want to support it, we have to look at the bigger picture. As Black people, we are disenfranchised so many times on so many different levels, and so we have to look at any opportunity to gain any kind of strength, any kind of power. And we're looking at this as far as employment, landlords, home ownership, all of that falls into that. There's no law in Macon that says someone can't discriminate against me because I'm Black. I mean, we can fight it. I mean, there is federal law, but Macon itself doesn't have those kind of protections for and I know with landlord on is more like sexual orientation and gender. And I think that when that falls into it, people were saying, okay, well, that's not me. I don't fall into that circle of sexual orientation and things of that nature. But when you can't take out bits and pieces of legislation. It's an all or nothing thing. So when we're saying no to that, we're also saying no to us having protection with employers and with business owners and things of that nature. So I think that's why it's important for us as people of Black and brown people to understand that we have to be able to take a moment to read through these things. We like to, and I'm guilty of it as well. Sometimes we like to separate ourselves from things because we're so tired of fighting so many different battles. But we have to realize that a lot of those battles are still ours to be fought. So that's my thought on it.
And James, if you could kind of piggyback off that and kind of give a little perspective, one from the religious community perspective, and then on the state level, where maybe you probably have some cases and reference points that I know you probably have come in contact with that could provide context to this conversation.
Definitely. So, one, thanks for having the conversation, and to Dr. Beverly and Sister Huston, excuse me. It's always good to be with you guys. I look at the conversation as it relates to civil rights and comprehensive civil rights and understanding it therein in a different way. Because often when we're talking about civil rights, we're often talking about defending or fighting for our rights to be able to be somebody in America. If we look at the Declaration of Independence, it says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, that all women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," which is a John Locke kind of statement of philosophy. And that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men and women, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That is the framework that our entire society of the Republic has been established upon. And so when we as people have instituted ourselves in a system that intentionally excluded us for generations, we begin the conversation from a model or a mindset of deficiency, meaning we got to fight to include ourselves in a body of law that for so many people were not included. And so we start the conversation from that premise, but I challenge us to move beyond that premise because it allows for us to find ourselves in a system of victim mentality. And so when we talk about instituting comprehensive civil rights, particularly in Macon-Bibb County, the people, the residents, the community members that make up Macon, they're not fighting for rights. They're securing that which has already been endowed to them by their Creator. No government institution can give it to them. No politician can give it to them. No legislative body can give that to them. They must secure their rights. And the Declaration of Independence outlines the way you do that. And I want us to start there as opposed to saying, well, what does this civil rights question mean? The second thing I'll say is when we talk about the law and we talk about the statutes and the official code of Georgia, we talk about local municipal codes and those kind of things. One of the things I often realize is that regardless of what's inscribed in the rule of law or in the jurisprudence of case law or any of those kinds of things, one of the things I oftentimes struggle with is trying to understand the impact that it has on everyday people. Because oftentimes and Dr. Beverly knows this all too well, oftentimes people get down to the state capitol and they have these very grandiose ideas, but it does not trickle down and actually save lives. It doesn't actually have the day-to-day impact on people's lives that they're there to serve. And so when you think about civil rights, you think about a young woman who is literally in her home just trying to live, but is evicted because she is a homosexual. Or you think about a black male, right, who is also a human being, who is literally terminated from his job because he was a convict and he has a federal conviction on his record. And he was no longer able to work because it made the company look bad. Talk about discrimination. Or you could talk about the immigrant who had been exposed for being an undocumented immigrant and is now cheated out of a fair day's work of wages. Because if you say something, we're going to call it ICE. Talk about discrimination. And so when we say understanding comprehensive civil rights, we're talking about lifting up the voices of the people that are found in the margins of life, the people that we talk about on social media and we never actually go fighting for, the people that we never see on social media because they're too busy fighting for themselves. That's who we're looking for. It's easy for us to get caught up in the narratives of the dominant culture that says we should do this because that's what the national media headlines are reading. No, what is happening in our community? How do we respond to those situations and those circumstances so that we can bring forth the humanity in all people? That is what understanding comprehensive civil rights is all about. And I believe that's what this conversation is so urgent and so necessary.
I agree completely. I mean, I think you captured that there, James. Like when we think about what we're advocating for, we're advocating for people to be seen as humans and to see each other's humanity. One of the questions that comes from this a lot of times is a class issue, right? And who's bringing this conversation up? Who's most affected by it? And what are the implications of it based on class and what that has to do with it? So to provide context, Marsha P. Johnson, a very famous transgender woman who died at the age of 47. And if you look at the 2015 U.S. Transgender Survey, 20% of Black transgender respondents were unemployed, which is 2 times the percent rate of Black people in the U.S. population. So there's a portion of the Black community in our fringes who are suffering more from the system and from these oppressive policies. And so by turning that blind eye to them, we're then turning that eye to ourselves. How do we unify that narrative socially to mobilize that into political action? And I'll open the floor to anyone for that.
I guess I'll hop in there first. You know, when we think about, I want to stay there for a second because we first have to wrestle with the question of who our people are.
Mm-hmm.
Because we assume just because people are Black or in the words of the theme here, people of color, I don't use that language, but I'll oblige here for the purpose of conversation, is that everybody who has our skin color are not our people. And there are people who are more committed to that to power and proximity to privilege than they are the people. And so when we get people in positions of authority and leadership, trying to undermine the effectiveness of that humanity argument, that humanistic argument, what we find is that there are differences in discrimination within public policy that does have that disparate impact when it comes to transgender women who are dying at record rates. Because I don't agree with the lifestyle choices that a person makes, I have the power now to castigate them to a third-class citizen. That's what we talk about comprehensive civil rights. How can you today use the opportunities that we have as leaders to be able to input policies that lift up and amplify and also embrace the humanity of all people, even people I don't necessarily agree with? And so I think the struggle is for us is really the white supremacy question. Is how do we deconstruct the systems of power that continue to enact violence upon communities, oftentimes in Black communities, but it's not limited to there. And I think that's really at the heart of that question, Weston, is how do we get rid of white supremacy?
Facts.
And it's not going to we're not going to get rid of it by enacting more policies, but the policy still is necessary to mitigate the harms that are enacted by the system itself.
Facts. And I think and that really kind of segues into to one of the other questions that was written and proposed was, how do you reconcile the overall civil rights push with the urge to exclude people on the fringes? And one of the things that I've always thought was huge, and that is typically brought up when this conversation is happening, is the traumatic history of Black sexuality, and to even start with A Birth of a Nation, in 1915, just the whole construct and framework around Black sexuality and freedom, and what that looks like, and where you're allowed to go and what you're allowed to do. And so thinking about the constructs that we create in the physical world, where it comes down to policy around bathrooms, around porcelain, which ones are we going to use, how we deal with that. One of the biggest conversations that I remember us having was the conversation of what happens if someone who's a transgender goes into a women's bathroom and then makes people feel uncomfortable, or tries to do some type of sexual deviant act. When we talk about deconstructing white supremacy, it's understanding those cultural influences that create a narrative around those people who are outside of the cultural norm. And if that's Black people now, and then the cultural norm expands and it becomes only cis Black people or cis people of color, however we want to call it, that cultural context really kind of drives the ability for us to come together and come up with some solutions. Have you seen, James, this one I'm gonna kind of toss to you. Have you seen that focusing on the economics of inclusion and the economic principle behind why having comprehensive civil rights and having this new narrative where we're unpackaging white supremacy and throwing it out and coming up with solutions to have more inclusive communities around economic conversations? So for example, Savannah, earlier today, a representative from Savannah was explaining how the impact of even having this type of ordinance in place then allows people who are outside of our cultural norm to feel comfortable and safe in this community. Has that been a conversation or pretext in order to push progressive policies around comprehensive civil rights?
So Weston, younger.
For you, that was for you, Doc.
That question. That's when I generally thought that many had the count on bit research that had people would come and bigger opportunity. It does. And real party, which is a good party. We're six and have a set of problems. Because if you team within get people work to come change community. There's a very ordinance got
I think it went out, but Dr. Beverly was speaking towards the or about the Community Enhancement Authority, and I know Tedra could probably pick up on some of the huge impacts that they've had on the area, especially in the housing focus. If you could, Tedra.
Can you hear me? Okay. Authority, which I've been fortunate enough to be part of, and Dr. Beverly brought me onto the program about 2 years ago. And the whole focus, as Dr. Beverly was saying, is to eliminate blight and poverty in Macon-Bibb County, in Category 4 poverty level areas in Bibb. And poverty touches everyone, and it is one of the key defining factors of issues that's the underlying factors that's affecting Macon. You know, it's why we have crime, is why we have blight. All the things stem around each other. So when you're continuously trying to fight that, it's almost when, you know, a comprehensive civil rights, when something like this comes across, basically, and I missed the end part of it, but I'm gonna say around what Dr. was trying to say, when something like this comes across our commission's desk, our mayor's desk, and it's saying that it's not worthy to be brought, is not, you know, that Macon doesn't need it. It's kind of a slap in the face in the work that's being done to eliminate poverty. Mm-hmm. Because if people can't work, if people don't know if they're going to keep their jobs when they go to it, if people can't get into housing, it's all for naught. And so not being, and I know we're talking about different things, you know, whether, you know, Wes, when you were talking about, you know, having different fringes, for me, black is black. What, you know, whatever our, or, you know, whether it's religion, whether it's sexual orientation, whether, you know, whether you're females, whether we're males, we are going through a certain level of discrimination at a constant level. I mean, if we look at housing, I mean, of course, my focus, over the last year has been housing. So I mean, I tend to focus on that aspect of things, and before that, it was criminal. So I've seen so many different things that's happened in our society. But even if we look at even for housing, we look at housing discrimination. White now, back in I think the 30s, when they had the New Deal and everything, we had the homeowner loans corporation, and they decided that places infiltrated by Negroes were not good places to give money to. And so even though they did over 1 million loans for homes during that time, they were only allowed, only white people could get those loans. And so that trickles down to now. If we look at home ownership is about 70 in Macon-Ville, 74% of home ownership is white, about 44% is black right now. And white people have 10 times more wealth, and that's because we aren't able to catch up because of redlining still existing. And that goes back to having comprehensive civil rights. I mean, it's all tied together. And then even when we look at I was reading up on something, a couple of weeks ago, where it said that, we had the Fair Housing Act of 1968, and that the gap of I hope I'm saying this right, the home ownership gap between blacks and whites, and I know we're using technical terms, people, whatever, I'm just gonna say black and white, between black and white is greater than it was before segregation. Because when all this redlining and everything came in, we started owning homes, but because of redlining, because of new slavery in the form of probation and incarceration and things of that nature, we became at a standstill. And so if we can't even, as a city, come together and say we need a civil rights act here in Macon so that we can have policy, because it's great and good if we're saying we want these things and that we're fighting for them, and this business agrees to it and this business doesn't, or people like the CEA and different organizations are willing to find people homes. But if the policy isn't there to make banks, to make these entities, to make business owners, to make landlords, to make developers allow black people, whether they're women, whether they're veterans, whether they're elderly, whether they're young, whether they're transgender, whoever they are, allow them to get homes, to build wealth, and allow them to work. I mean, it doesn't matter. So, I think that if we're not on the same page with that, and anyone who knows me knows that my faith is very important to me. My Christianity is very important to me. And I cannot profess salvation and not love all people, So those two things, and say that laws are okay for me or rights are okay for me, but if it has a line in there that goes against something that I shouldn't believe in, then those rights aren't good for that person. And Weston, I know I might have got off because it's very passionate.
No.
But I think that it all goes hand in hand. Even I can build 100 houses, but if I can't get someone financed to buy into those houses, it doesn't matter.
Right. And I think that's really like, it's so big, because when you talk about comprehensive civil rights, it can be, it's because it's such a broad topic. If you want to focus in on gender equity, then you could do that. If you want to focus in on providing the proper infrastructure for everyone to feel comfortable, you could do that. If you want to talk about voting rights, we could do that. All of this is captured in the conversation and discussion around what comprehensive civil rights look like. When we talk about civil rights, these are the rights that, because we are citizens here, there are certain things that we expect. And if we say that we're going to have a public business, right? So, for an example, Georgia is one of only 5 states that allows racial and religious discrimination in businesses open to the public. If we allow this, then what are we saying? How are we creating our business culture? How are we creating our communities? What are we saying about what we're creating? And we are intentional about not creating certain things, or intentional about making sure that we have to come up with some type of working solution of how we address civil rights comprehensively. And there's no topic that doesn't fall within this context. This is the basis of how America was built, like James said. I, I don't see how we separate the two. So I kind of want to go into some of the other statistics that are specifically relevant for Georgia, and then I'll kind of kick some topics off to you, and then kind of see which one really hits home to you. But to Tedra's point, when we talk about housing, we have no law preventing landlords from refusing to rent or sell to someone on the basis of their sexual orientation or gender identity, right? And if we're not arguing for these issues, if we're not making these issues relevant, then we'll see more disparity between these different races and different living experience.
Before you go on, I want to stop there for a second, because I think this is a good point to recognize that the difference in jurisdiction is also very relevant, because even though Georgia may not have that protection under the FHA Act, I mean the Federal Housing Act of, I think it was 1968 or 1998, one of them, is that protection is there. And so just because Georgia may not have it on its book within the OCGA, there's still protections. And so we have the infrastructure to be able to push this. And this is why every level of government is just as important. The local ordinances are just as important as the Federal Housing Act of whenever, I can't think of when it was passed, but it created an institution.
Right.
And so we have to we have to know what resources we have available to us, so that way when we're instituting a comprehensive civil rights agenda on the local level, we already have the framework. We do not have to reinvent the wheel, right? When you talk about Hate Crime Act, before Georgia passed this Hate Crime Act several years ago, there was one on the federal level, right? And we had to get rid of ours here in Georgia because the Supreme Court of Georgia said that it was too broad, it was too ambiguous. So we had to go back and write it over, right? How do we use the framework from the Federal Hate Crimes Act? And again, we just passed another one yesterday. The Senate just passed the Hate Crime Act or COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act of 2021. These are the federalistic kind of properties working in tandem with one another. The other thing I'll say is this: is that when we're looking at the system of violence that continues to permeate our communities, we have to understand that this is not about Black life. Our bodies are what's being attacked. So when you talk about trans women being murdered, right, it has everything to do with their bodies being valuable, but their lives not. And so when you institute a body of law based on a lie that says their life does not matter, of course you're going to get discriminant policies that oftentimes exclude them, or if not directly target them. We have to address that head on. We cannot avoid that. We cannot ignore that. We cannot try to shy away from that. The laws that have been written in this country continue to target our bodies, in which our blood is ultimately that which is shed on the streets every single day. We can't ignore that. We have to own that as an American evil. And so when we talk about, how do we resolve that? I think we first have to, one, identify the pain that has been caused as a result of the legacy of insurrection and white supremacy, right? But then how do we resolve that to a place where we can create communities that are developed on the premise of justice and equitable application of law, good law, just law? That is the premise, I think, where we find ourselves here in Macon, is because you have an opportunity to really be proactive in trying to resolve some of these situations. But until we have the conversation of why Macon-Bibb is currently in a situation it's in, where a comprehensive civil rights ordinance is needed, then it's not going to be a conversation that's really worth having. That is, I think, the golden ticket to being able to push this thing. We got to have honest conversations, because the reality is that we're not post-racial. The reality is not the reality is that there's not an equitable situation here in this community where people are not suffering. Why are people suffering? How are they suffering? Where are they suffering? Who's suffering? Once you answer that question, I guarantee you that you can really have a comprehensive conversation about implementing civil rights in that community. I
agree. And I want to kind of hop into the chat and get some of these questions. And as they roll in, we'll keep asking some other ones. So one of the first ones we have is I've also seen non-discrimination ordinance which protect against the discrimination based on source of income and homelessness status grounds. Is that something that Georgia's city leaders are considering? Would you think that? Well, I'll kind of kick that off to Tedra. Do you think that income-based non-discriminatory ordinances are something that are particularly relevant among our leadership in the ideology, or do you think that is that's coming down the pipeline, or is it even a reality here?
I think over what we've seen over the last couple of months, that I do think that the idea around income-based of those having more protection for those who are at low income bracket and those experiencing homelessness. I do see that is becoming more prevalent. I do believe that there's become a spotlight around it. I don't think it's something that is far-fetched for us to think that the city couldn't address it. I think right now, more than any other time that we've had, I think it would be something that would be addressed. When we look at income, I think it'd be amazing if the city of Macon could come to the forefront on how do we. And I think that's a hard one. How do really explaining and how do we address the discrimination that people in lower income brackets actually experience? The thought process is ingrained in people's minds. The automatic things that think to be poor or don't want to work, and therefore that the discrimination that comes along with that. I think that it also affects when you look at someone who doesn't have the funds to say, if you're experiencing homelessness or you're someone who can't readily get the clothes you need to go to a job interview or don't have access to internet. Those are the things you have to look at when you're looking at income discrimination. Does everyone have access to being able to better themselves? We're saying the only way, even when we look at like the COVID, the vaccine of being able to, be able to set your schedule for COVID. Most of that was done online, but does everyone really have access to the internet to be able to get that? You know what I'm saying? So I think that I don't have an answer for that one. It's something that, in the work I do, that I deal with citizens who, I'm not going to say who are in areas that are difficult to develop because of the situation that they're in, not a situation that they choose. And so if we can find ways as a community to come together to say, hey, this is this is what we require. Jobs, you're going to have to be able to, if someone can't come in a certain kind of way, then you still have to be able to give them an opportunity for that job. Or if someone doesn't, we have to be able to bridge the gap. And I know that's a policy issue, but that's also a community issue. That's also a neighbor issue that I think that needs to be addressed. And as growing up where I grew up in Baton Rouge, it was very family oriented. Everyone kind of helped each other. So getting to the aspect, I'm in Pleasant Hill right now. So, that's, where my heart is currently. I'm all over Macon, but I'm in Pleasant Hill. And then just learning the history of Pleasant Hill, where strong Black business owners and educators built this community. They helped each other build themselves, build up. And so being able to get back to that level. So I think that's two-pronged. I think that, our government definitely has a responsibility. But I think that we also have responsibility to each other on that one. If someone needs help and we see that they need help, being able to help them. But there's a lot of gaps when it comes to, economic. There's such You know, we have people who are making $17,000 a year or less in one community, and $200,000 a year in communities that are right next door to it. And that's, I mean, that's not a problem with the person making $200,000, but how do we help this person who, I mean, I have young people right now who aren't going to school, not because they don't want to go to school, because they don't have uniforms. They don't want to go to school smelling because they can't take a bath. And so how do we, I mean, that's a question I think that needs a bigger audience, but it's something that definitely needs to be addressed. I don't know if I answered it.
And if I could hop in, or Lady Beverly, did you want to before I go, or okay? So one of the things in response to that, and that's a very good question. Who answered that? Harry, and Harry knows this out of everyone, is that not every civic problem requires a legislative response. I would be careful, and I would have to look at the legislation before I actually commented on what he said, but I would automatically think about, you know, the balancing of rights of property owners, tenants, all of those. You already have a body of law that has implication in these day-to-day interactions within our community. We have to first know what those things are, because say, for instance, you say, let's institute a city ordinance on a local level and says, you know, you can't discriminate against a tenant based on their ability to be able to pay. That violates the property owners' rights to be able to pay their mortgage. That's why they have a tenant property owner relationship, landlord relationship. And so now you've infringed on somebody else's rights to be able to maintain their property, which is, again, at the heart of the Declaration of Independence. We have to be able to balance the rule of law with the body of law that's already there, called the jurisprudence, with what we're actually asking every human being to be able to display as citizens of this nation. I would be very, very challenged with a law that says, just how you presented it, that says we'll protect, quote unquote, protect against discrimination based on source of income, because I could see that being used the opposite way. The intent, yes, I get it. But the opposite way is also something that would be used to be able to harm poor people. I see rich people being able to say, well, you're discriminating against me because I'm wealthy, right? Which we see it all the time. And so we have to be very, very vigilant in the proposals of law that we're using as a comprehensive approach to resolving some of these issues, because though it may make us feel good, it's not having the intended impact that we're seeking.
Were you gonna say something?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Oh.
Okay. So the state of Georgia has the census of living wage. And whole in our was created less so you would get ratio. Is it? I'm willing. I'll take to build crew year. D. No. City.
Some of the other questions we have. All right, so we have one, Cameron Pennybacker. Charitable acts are often well-intended as individuals readdress for economically marginalized communities. Isn't a living wage an unavoidable component in addressing systemic poverty? Yeah, I don't want to speak for the group, but I think that's a great question, and I think that it is something that has to be looked at when we start talking about addressing some of the inequity. James?
Oh, you already knew. My good friend Rev is spot on. I think the living wage is unavoidable, and in fact, it's something that we continue to suffer from because we don't have a living wage. And the conversation and public discourse around that question right now is just overwhelming. Is that right now here in the state of Georgia, we have a living wage of, I think, what, $5.25. Federal living wage is $7.25. Congress is currently debating legislative proposals that lifts that up to $10 or $11 per hour. And, you know, economists say the living wage needs to be around 22.5 on average. If you go to a Tennessee, that may be too much, or you go to Atlanta, that may be too little. But the reality is where we are, the cost of living has skyrocketed. The cost of education has skyrocketed. The cost of healthcare has skyrocketed. The cost of just living in Macon Bibb has skyrocketed. And we have yet to see the kind of reforms to our economic policy that really would lift up the burden of people who are most impacted by bad economic and fiscal policy. And so the short answer is yes. Unfortunately, I don't think we have the legislative courage to be able to push some of these things. You know, we're trying to do all we can do. I know Dr. Beverly is doing all he can do, and Tidra as well. But the reality is we have to find creative ways to build community, sometimes outside of the body of law, that is oftentimes insufficient. And what that looks like is using creative methods to be able to address these failures by ensuring that we can invest in ourselves, making sure if we are business owners, we're paying people a living wage. When we go out to eat, we're not just paying people minimum, tips. We're actually giving them something that they can actually live off of, right? And you'll be surprised at how people respond to those kinds of acts, because you're not doing it out of charity. You're doing it because you understand the role that you play. Every time I tip, people say, thank you. You didn't have to do that. I'm like, what did I do? I just paid you what you earned. You know what I mean? And so I think of that in terms of the response to that question.
Just mirror what Mr. Woodall said. I think in this case, because this is I think we are on a long road before we get to the numbers we need to get to for our society. It's on us. When we have those opportunities, for instance, when we do stuff with CEA Mosaic, we're hiring people. One of the things that we required the contractors do when they wanted to do a bid with us to build is they have to hire our people at a livable wage. And we gave them, this is the number you have to at least be at. And you have to do that or you can't do a contract with us. And we required that and we held that line. And so, we have to come, when we're in situations of some sort of power, we have to use that power for good. And kind of set the tone for what we expect for our people. And so I definitely am in agreement with that.
That's a beautiful thing. And DeMarcus actually asked a good one. There's a push for a Crown Act creating, and that stands for Create a Respectful and Open Workplace for Natural Hair. It's being pushed and discussed at the state level, but until it passes, is there an opportunity for it to get pushed at the local level? And currently, there are 3 different places where it has been considered: East Point, Georgia, and Stockbridge, and then I can't remember the other one. What is it?
I think it's South Fulton. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think it's South Fulton. Did y'all hear me talk about the Crown Act before? Because I think my internet went out. No. Okay, man. My apologies. I was just riffing, man. I was like, I don't think anybody hear me. But there is that. So the Crown Act create a respectful and open world for natural hair, right? That's what that is. What's interesting is that one of our members, hear me? Okay. One of our members, Kim Schofield, tried to do a statewide Crown Act amendment. Her bill didn't get a hearing. And that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a lot of legislation that won't even get a time of day. They don't want to hear it. And so we want to push then in the local space for a Virgil Watkins, right, to take up something like that, who's a champion for us. Elaine Luke is a champion for us, right? Some folk in our community, a new mayor who can actually be a champion for the whole community to take on these issues now. And the Crown Act is something that we should absolutely do in Bibb County. No, absolutely, without equivocation to a fault. That's something that we ought to do, and that's something they should take up next week, for real.
Easily, especially when you think about the diversity in our community here and making Georgia. I know even when I used to have dreads, there was a different connotation of who I am or what type of jobs I'm eligible for, and so I think that would be huge, just to change the perspective for making. Let's see, let me look at some other questions we have. Are there labor laws that could deal with employment issues through Labor Relationship Board as a simpler process to address issues without a federal court cases? So does anybody want to answer that? I think you're still on mute, Rev. Can you see that one? Or was anyone respond? Yeah, and I think like for an example, for this one, like the Labor Relations Board, that
you have arbitration, you have EEOC.
Right.
I guess I'm trying to get some clarity on the question. Outside of going to federal court, are there ways for you to resolve some of the labor issues that you find? Yeah, EEOC in arbitration. We normally would, and this is not legal advice whatsoever, but we normally wouldn't tell people. In people's contract, you also have arbitration clauses, and that's a way. Oftentimes, we see big corporations try to, take, some of the rights away from the small guy. But ultimately, you have numerous opportunities to be able to resolve any of these issues, and a lot of times, to teachers' point, some of our people just don't understand the avenues that they have available at them. And so, I would just recommend you talking to an attorney to make sure that, you know what your options are before you take it. You know, one of the things we always tell people is don't quit if you can help it, because that allows for you to be able to fight so much harder if they fire you. Demand they fire you. But again, that's not legal advice. That's just me being me.
Yeah. And I see another question that's so it's kind of contentious, and I think it's a good one. How do you rebuke the argument that the expansion of non-discrimination for sexual orientation, gender identity, etc., is an insult to those whose traits are more visible, such as skin color or sex?
Those are, and sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I find those arguments so distant, because honestly, at the end of the day, they're still human beings. I don't care if this doesn't need to be the struggle Olympics. Who struggles more? Who is more oppressed? The reality is people are being killed. That's the reality. People are literally being murdered, regardless if they're black, regardless if they're trans, regardless of if they are Christian or Asian, or it doesn't matter. What we need to be able to do is protect our communities the best way we know how. And the only way we know how to do that is by sticking together. I don't care if you are in the black community. I don't care if you're white, liberal, if you are a Republican who is an Asian. That the reality is this: you should be able to live a life and not live in fear of violence, of retribution, of discriminatory attacks. So regardless of where you find yourself on the identity scale, regardless of where you find yourself on the political and the partisan scale, you should not have to live in this society and be afraid of your life. And so the moment it becomes, well, the gay struggle or the lesbian struggle or the bisexual struggle or the trans struggle is not same as the African-American struggle because you all weren't chattel slaves. That's the most violent kind of response to the kind of oppression that we're fighting against every single day. And I, for one, as the state president of the largest and the oldest and the biggest civil rights organization in this state and in this nation, I will not stand for it, and I will not entertain any conversation else likewise.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Teddy.
And yeah, I just think that when you do things of that nature, you're putting yourself in no difference than anyone who's discriminated against you. I mean, there's no one deserves rights more than any other person. I mean, and for us to have that mindset, it just puts us right along with those who discriminated against us, who kept putting us down. I mean, so I can have rights, and the next person can have rights too. One person doesn't have to win. So I mean, that's my mindset on that concept. I mean, it's everyone. Our goal should be that everyone is treated the same.
You know, to that question, I'm a little older than you guys. To that question, I would say this, because I understand where it comes from. First of all, I understand where that comes from, right? Is when you grow up black in this country, there are certain things that you cannot hide. I cannot change, no matter how hard I try, the complexion of my skin color. You're gonna see me. I got a suit on today, but if I put on a hoodie, right, and grew a beard, right, man, I'm a danger to somebody somewhere just by seeing me walk by. If you don't know this face and this crazy looking nose I got, right, I'm a danger to somebody just because of the complexion of my skin. Now, to the people so that's a very real thing, right? You have a very identifiable phenotype. The way you look and present physically is a threat to a lot of people. And to the folk who feel that way, like, wait a second, well, this person can hide this, I understand it. But the reality is this: America is based on building blocks, right? We start at wherever that place is, and that group gets hammered. They get beat up, they get whatever, right? That's just a part of America. When you look at the Native Americans, you look at, anybody in America who comes to this country, there's a natural inclination for that person to be the other. And the other is always going to get beat up. It just so happens that we started and got beat up, and we still getting beat up, but we keep learning how to make a more perfect union. And so to the people who say, well, what about them? It's like, no, we're creating a more perfect union. And so we invite everybody to the struggle bus, right? Because the more that we struggle together, the better off we're going to be long term. And when we can start to see the humanity, I think Brother James said it well, is that it's not about sort of equal rights, it's about human rights. And whatever you're going through, you should have a right to pursue the life that God has given you, however you choose to do that. And no one should be able to take that away from you. And if we have more people who are struggling for human rights, then some of these questions will go away. But we are obviously the building blocks for a lot of these conversations, which I understand where it comes from. But the reality is America is based on building blocks. And this is just one more building block that we have to build and to struggle with one another around what our humanity really should be together. And so I appreciate the question, and I appreciate the responses from my brother James and Sister Tedra.
So how do comprehensive civil rights intersect with the criminal justice system? Is it primarily a reform to the system, or are there other ways in which the two intersect? Oh man, there's a lot. There's a long history between the criminal justice system and civil rights, or just human rights. Doc, you want to hop in?
Yeah, man. That is a big question. I mean, on the heels of the three guilty, verdict the other day, man, it's huge. In my mind, that question sends me in an overdrive for two reasons. One is I deal with it every day at the Capitol, right? We are dealing with the intersection of civil and civil liberties every day. The stuff that we're really trying to talk about, police civil liberty reform, it can't get a hearing. The folk that are in power that won't even allow you to have a hearing. And so what happens is, James and I've been in conversation, we got to go outside the Capitol, and he got to put pressure from an advocacy standpoint to the business community to make sure they say, look, you got a stake in this stuff. You got a stake in voting. You got a stake in civil liberties. You got a stake in civil rights. But from a legislative standpoint, if we can't even get a hearing, people at the legislature right now who are getting arrested, legislators arrested, protesting, not going, don't even hear anything we have to say. And so legislature, James is a great advocate for folks to understand the leverage that we truly have when it relates to the grassroots, but the grass tops. Coca-Cola, and Home Depot, and Delta. Because that's going to start to change the mentality of the people who are in power. See a sea change, and that happened in the 80s, and now it has to happen again. We have to start leveraging the different facets that we have to through advocacy at the tops. That's the only way stuff is going to change in the civil space until we get rid of the governor next year and many of the legislators. Just flip the House, and we'll have some comprehensive civil liberties conversations. I guarantee you that.
And I'll say this, when you talk about civil rights in the criminal justice space, there's just a decision issued by the Supreme Court today, or opined by the Supreme Court today in Jones v. Mississippi, that pretty much ended any reformation attempt at, giving juveniles the life without parole sentence. People have been fighting for years to get rid of that, and we finally, Justice Kennedy was critical in really stopping giving youth, our young people, our juveniles, life without parole. And now a 6-3 decision today by the Supreme Court overturns that. And now we have a situation where juveniles can literally be tried with a crime, regardless of what the crime is, and be sentenced to life without parole. And there's some stipulations that go into it, some case law that goes into that. But that's what we're talking about, civil rights. What, as an individual, what certain rights do you have, regardless of what happens in circumstance? Regardless of if you're tried and you're accused of a crime, are you granted certain inalienable rights because you are a citizen of the United States? How do we engage that legal process? It's deeper than just saying, well, I was discriminated against and now there's a disparate impact on my life. That's important. But some of these things also impact people we often throw to the side of society as well. Victims of crimes, but also those who perpetrate crimes. We can't just throw them away and think that they are no longer supposed to be, valuable contributing members to society. You talk about faith. There's scripture that talks about them too, right? Proclaim release of captives. That means those who are in prison. We have a duty to serve and work with them too. And we can't just forget about them because they have committed an offense. Because truth be told, some of us have created some offenses too, right? Both in a spiritual sense, but also in real life. I know I haven't not committed crimes before, and if I was thrown in jail, I would want to be treated with the same level of dignity and respect as anybody else. We have prisoners right now who are we've sued the state of Georgia because the state of Georgia did not do right by the inmates at these facilities across this nation. Across this state during a public health pandemic, not giving them access to COVID testing, not giving them access to masks, not even giving them access to vaccinations. And so we sued the state of Georgia for that. If we would throw them away, nobody would be asking what's happening to the inmates at these facilities. They are people too.
I see Andrea is back on the screen, so I guess that means we're probably getting close to the end of our session. And so I guess we'll kick it around to all of our panelists one more time. Let them kind of have their closing words, and we'll depart. Cedric.
Thank you, Weston. I really enjoyed today's conversation. It's been a great evening. Again, just like I thought, I was able to gain knowledge. We'll talk about something that's very, very, very near and dear to my heart, very passionate about. I hope that the people who were able to listen in and those who might listen to the recording will really take to heart what's been said today, understand the importance of the Comprehensive Civil Rights, not only for the state of Georgia, but for Macon-Bibb County. And as it comes around again, which I know it will, that we'll have a lot more advocates for its passing.
Dot.
Thank you, and thank you all for having this important conversation. You can never get tired of having these community conversations because where it is. I'm grateful to be in the presence of all you guys tonight. Obviously, people don't realize that Weston and I saw each other last night. This is the first time I saw him since COVID. I'm hugging him, brother. And so good to see you, man, today. And then James, man, for you, and we did some good work this year in the Capitol. And Tedra's my and so I appreciate being on the panel with you guys. A lot of work to do. I know that Virgil Watkins is going to, and that's going to be. We'd also encourage him to think about in our communities. Comprehensive Civil Rights Bill. We can do that. I think would be. Thank you guys. I'll talk to y'all individually and collectively soon.
I guess I'll finish up here. Thanks to Tidra and Dr. Beverly and Andrea and Weston. Thank you all so much. And I would be remiss if I'm virtually in Macon, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention my mom, my road dog, State Representative Miriam Parrish. She's amazing and I love her. And if she's watching, I'll send my love and hopefully she'll text me back today. But no, in all seriousness, this was a much needed conversation, and I look forward to not only seeing Macon-Bibb take this up, again, coming forward in the next year, but also having conversations across the state of Georgia, because this is something that we can have a direct impact on the day-to-day lives of so many people. So thank you all so much. Special shout out to Ms. Cox. She's amazing. She put all this on together with an amazing team, and none of this could be done without the folks behind the scenes. So thank y'all so much.
So I'm here because we are closing out. I want to just say for myself that this has been an amazing conversation. It has lifted me. It has educated me. It has given me a new saying, because I'm not now going to say to people all the time that we are not in the struggle Olympics. Thank you, Reverend Woodall, for that. But I really, really want to say from myself, from Scott, Claire, and DeMarcus, we thank you all for this wonderful conversation. I really, really, really appreciate it. And hopefully I'm speaking for the people who are listening, and I'm sure that they enjoyed it just as much as I did. So I want to also encourage everybody to come for the sessions that are being held tomorrow. They are at 10 a.m. and at 1 a.m. You don't have to register again. You can use the same link to get back. If today's or any of the sessions raise more questions for you, or you'd like to have more conversations about the need for civil rights protections on a local level, join us Saturday at 3 p.m. at Fall Line Brewery for more discussion. This will be an unstructured time for visiting and sharing of ideas. We will adhere to all COVID precautions, including requiring masks and keeping proper distancing. Also, please follow us on Facebook at Comprehensive Civil Rights Ordinance Making. Thank you all so much for a wonderful conversation. And everyone, please have a good night.